Hello, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have everybody back here and at home watching the next or this edition of the BK Talks called Not in My Backyard, Citizen Engagement in the Circularity Era. As much as it is difficult for me to explain what this topic is about, I will first show a little video, short video, which is not that short actually. It took me some time to decide whether to show it or not, but I think it's a good idea to do so. This is a video that comes from British television and it was broadcasted in last spring. I have shown it to my students with a great success, and it tells a certain story. We will discuss it. We will discuss about it later. But this is the reason, watching this video, that made me decide to program this edition of the BK Talks that is happening tonight. So let's start by watching at the video without further ado.
If you were around where I was at the weekend, there was queues and queues of people possibly panic buying, which is what some of the companies are saying.
I didn't see panic buying, but I did see a lot of forecourts that we had sold out.
Yeah, and I think
people driving around.
Yes, and of course we've got 21.5 million people on the road this week for Easter. Yep. And of course, you know, there are lots of questions over whether there's going to be enough fuel for everybody because of these protests that have been going on. And the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has called the protest by eco-activists as selfish and fanatical. Demonstrations were held across the weekend in oil depots and on bridges in central London, which saw dozens of people arrested. It affected the Midlands too, and it may well spread across the country if these protests carry on.
Well, obviously the climate activists involved say that they need to bring an end to the use of fossil fuels. So are they in danger of turning people off that cause by these actions? Well, let's have a chat. Joining us now to discuss this is Miranda Wheelahan. She's a Just Stop Oil activist. She says that we have to move away from oil for good. And journalist Larry Turner, who thinks that activists are irritating when they disrupt travel and they block roads. We'll come to you in a minute, Larry. Many people would agree that we have to wean ourselves off oil, we have to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, we have to develop renewables. I certainly feel that. But at the same time, they deeply resent having their personal lives massively interrupted by the actions of people like you are taking. They can't get fuel for their cars, they can't get fuel for their central heating systems, they worry that if something bad happens, that an ambulance won't get to them because that won't have fuel. Do you accept that you're possibly alienating people who, in a general sense, would support your background cause? Because you are alienating.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't think any of us want to be disrupting people's lives, but I think given the science and the things that academics are saying about what oil is causing around the world and in this country too, this is the level of action that needs to be taken when our government is failing on their energy policies and their climate pledges.
But you'd accept, wouldn't you, that it's a very complicated discussion to be had. It's a very complicated thing. And this Just Stop Oil slogan is very playgroundish, isn't it? It's very Vicky Pollard. It's quite childish. Just stop oil. I mean, come on, there's more to say than that, isn't there?
I would say that the answers are actually very simple. We need to stop new oil licensing, and that's what we're asking. You know, with the oil reserves that we have now and the oil fields that we have that are still going, that would provide us with 8 years of oil if we said no to new oil, and that's what we're asking for.
But how do the blockades advance that argument? They don't, do they? They simply cause nothing but disruption, and you get a negative reaction. I've got to tell you, we were expecting to get some messages of support from our viewers for you. We haven't had one, not one. We've had nothing but furious complaints from people. Nothing positive at all.
I wonder if any of you have read the latest IPCC reports that have come out this year. You know, what they have said is that we are on the road for climate catastrophe. We are on the road for 3 degrees of warming. This will happen to my generation, to your children's generation, potentially to your grandchildren. And I think we have a moral responsibility to act now. You know, we're supposed to be climate leaders. We're geopolitical leaders. We could set the way for the whole planet by committing to stopping oil, moving to energy efficiency, moving to renewables, moving to insulation. And I think the children and the future deserve at least that.
There are, from I think 2020, Larry, the source of UK electricity from renewables outstripped what we use from fossil fuels. So we are, as a country, moving in the right direction, but clearly not as fast as we should be, and that is the problem. There's a sense of urgency that the eco-activists have, that they fear that the rest of us don't embody that, and certainly government policy might not be, you know, reacting to that sense of urgency which is required.
I think the problem I have is this idea that the one group of people have decided that they are the ones to save the world, and there's a certain po-faced, incredibly irritating. I'm getting it coming off in waves towards me here, like, how dare you question us because we know what's right. I'm going to glue my hand to some tarmac and then I'm going to be a martyr and I'm going to be a good person, while the rest of us can't get on with our days. I mean, you know, with respect, Miranda is 20. I'm more than twice her age. You know, I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got an elderly mother. We have to get on with our lives. Most people feel they're doing their bit. They are doing the recycling. They're trying. I can't afford an electric car. I can't afford a heat pump. Most people can't afford that. The people that the campaigners should be focusing on is the government, not on ordinary people. But it's about ego. There's no doubt that we've had a winter without any protests, but as soon as the sun comes out, oh, it's eco-festival time. And it is a festival. It's a big jamboree. It's let's get on social media. Let's sit down with a placard. Let's advertise to my friends what a great person I am. While the rest, ordinary people who have to go to work, can't get to work.
What's your response?
I just can't believe that that's what you're saying. The United Nations are telling us if we get to 1.7 degrees of warming, half of the population will be exposed to climate conditions that are unlivable,
and that's
unworkable.
what you're here to talk about. But I suppose the point isn't about saying the facts over and over again. It's about the actual protests and about the disruption. And I suppose what for some people, I suppose it is the disconnect between understanding what you think you're achieving by creating disruption to ordinary people versus those big, very important issues that we're all aware of, but clearly you are very passionate about. How do you think it affects the speeding up of those policies that you want? What is the connection between the two?
You're saying that you're aware of this, but I don't think that you are aware. I don't think you are aware, and I don't think the government and the media are doing their duty to show how serious this is.
But
We're trying to uphold the science. The science is being ignored. The academics are being ignored.
Is it ignored? But we're not allowed to get diesel cars after 2020.
We live in a democracy, and it's not the right of one small group of people to tell everybody else how to live. Go through the democratic process. Talk to your MP, get a government elected who is doing what you want them to do. Don't just simply think, well, we can change everything.
I have to say, Larry, if that was going to work, it would have worked by now. And I think that there is a point to say.
They have to win hearts and minds, and they're not winning
Well, you talk about democracy. Let's talk about hypocrisy. Now, this is a very typical message, OK, that we've had this morning. This is Jam on Twitter, speaking for many, many people. Everything these Stop Oil protesters wear or buy or eat was delivered or manufactured using oil. And that includes the glue that they use to stick themselves to the road with. What they're saying is that your protests are, by definition, massively imperfect. I mean, the clothes that you're wearing, to some extent, owe their existence to oil because they were taken in a car or a truck or a van to a shop, you know? There are so many ways that oil impacts on your life as a protester, but you don't acknowledge that.
We're talking about crop failure by 2030. We're talking about people in this country right now in fuel poverty because of the prices of oil, and you're talking about the clothes that I'm wearing.
No, listen,
but this is so serious.
To be fair, up to now, you've answered questions, but that's a complete avoidance of the question. What about the accusation of hypocrisy, that actually you owe your lifestyle just as much to oil as the rest of us?
If we want to talk about hypocrisy, look at the government that has pledged for net zero by 2050, and now they're looking at opening 42 new oil fields, which will be releasing fossil fuels into the 2050s. That is a death sentence for my generation and for your children.
Are you going to answer that question, or would you rather
How can we be talking about individual scale when we're asking the government to change so we as individuals no longer have to be reliant?
There are levels of hypocrisy.
Is there any proof that any of the disruption you have caused has changed government policy? I would say no. All it has done is the government has tried to ban protests. It's been completely counterproductive. In the meantime, the collateral damage to ordinary people has been huge. We've been through such a trauma the last 2 years. I think there's a question of read the room here. The whole nation has been through this terrible trauma. A lot of people have lost their jobs, have lost their businesses, have lost their homes. And yet now, just when we think we're about to climb out of this terrible trauma, now it's like, can I get petrol to go and see my 90-year-old mother? I mean, that's why people are so angry about what you're doing, because it's selfish, it's narcissistic, it's ego-driven, and it doesn't change government policy.
How do the police treat you on these demonstrations? How have you found their behaviour towards you?
I mean, it's not really a pleasant experience, but I think that's a price worth paying when we're looking at the future. And I do apologize.
Academia, what science and technology is already telling us, vis-a-vis of what the general or ordinary people, as this is how they are being called in this video, do think or feel that they are. Tonight we have a panel which will be moderated by my colleague at the Y Factory, Felix Madrazo. He has already participated in several of the BK talks. We will be, I want to thank Juliana, Alex, Michelle, Maurice, and Ingrid for being here tonight. And without further ado, I'm giving the word to Felix so that we can try to, let's say, clear doubts about how different or how far away ones we are from others, as we saw in that video. Thank you. Felix, the word is yours.
Thanks, Javier. I hope the tone of the debate is not as aggressive as what we've seen in the talk. That was not the idea, that you get somehow aggressive. We will never arrive there, I think. So let's go to present our guest tonight. If we can go through the slideshow. I think, well, I'm a Mexican architect living in Holland. Have a research collective called Super Sudaca. I have been teaching in the Y Factory for many years and in other places, and I also have an office called International Design. Do I need to click something? Oh, no, there you go. Oh my God, these letters are way too small. Perhaps you can introduce yourself, Juliana.
Yes, of course. Thank you for inviting me for this panel. My name is Juliana Gonçalves. I am an assistant professor here at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. I sit at the Department of Urbanism. I have just started actually 2 months ago. My work is related to climate adaptation, public participation, and spatial justice.
Now, for each of the panelists, we also have an image that they send us that they want to give a kind of comment to that, a caption to it. I know you didn't send this one, but I found it in your papers.
Yeah, I did. This a picture normally pops up when we look for the participation ladder, which is a theoretical understanding of public participation, and it kind of ranks different types of participation over a ladder, starting with very low levels of participation or actually manipulation or therapy. And then in the middle you have tokenism, which is more consultation. And at the bottom you have more citizen empowerment. And this is normally a critique on this tokenism area of the ladder, that there is a lot of public participation processes, but they are kind of captured, or they are just used so that the projects can show that they do public participation, but in the end, they only want to get their projects accepted or done. So I really like this picture, actually. It's about the power of capitalism to capture all progressive or all types of progressive ideas and make a profit out of it.
So for those of you who don't know French, at the end it means they profit. So I participate, you participate, blah, 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 and then they profit. Next one, please.
And this is the picture that I chose. It's about giving a voice to people so they can actually participate in social action. I am working in a project where we are developing a tool and also public participation processes that are open source, and we try to provide guidelines so that people using these processes also do it in an inclusive way. So that's why I chose this, because in the end, it's the mission of this project to give voice to the citizens so that they can act in the city.
Should I be in control now? Okay. Exciting. Oh, the other way around. Ingrid Mull, can you please introduce yourself since my glasses don't work for this distance?
Well, thank you for the big promise to introduce me. So my name is Ingrid Mulder. I'm an expert in transformative and social design. I work as an associate professor at the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering, and I had the participatory city making lab with focus on the role of design in ensuring that we can participate in sustainability transitions. So it means that everybody needs to participate in these transitions. And I'm happy to share my expertise on that with you all. And I just chose this picture because, first of all, I find it quite difficult to picture the things I do because I focus on this enabling infrastructure that helps people to participate, so how to picture that. But this is a project that works on the circular economy, but there we not only focus on the technical solutions, but mainly on the participatory turn along. So how to ensure that everybody can participate in this challenge. We work with the municipality of Bergen, Uitgeest and Heilo to see how basically citizens, civil servants, social entrepreneurs can all have a contribution in this different concept. So the concept is not having a new building, but mainly use it as a means to change.
Thank you, Ingrid. Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Provoost. I'm an architectural historian. I have an office which exists for 28 years today, Crimson.
You beat me there.
I'm the dean of the independent school for the city and also the director of the International Newtown Institute. And we work, well, especially in Asia, in Africa, and nowadays also in Europe. Yeah, that's my introduction.
I have an image
you put
that you
in
didn't
something
send
else.
Me. Yeah, I know. Just, just in case, I just want to make sure you give a couple of words to this title that we used to like. I don't know, it's quite old, I know, but I still love it. So can you just say something about it?
This is one project of Crimson that started, well, 15 odd years ago. It's called WIMBY instead of NIMBY. So welcome into my backyard. And it had to do with the regeneration of an area in Rotterdam, one of the deprived neighborhoods far out of the center. And there we worked a lot with participation, residents' involvement, and yeah, all kinds of projects ranging from temporary art installations to permanent architecture and urban planning projects.
I will not comment on this for now. I will just move on to the next, but we can discuss, come back to this later.
Yeah,
I don't know if they should be together, but maybe
two different stories that I thought would be relevant for today. On the left, you see an image that, for me, refers to the role of the architect in in fulfilling the circular ambitions or sustainability ambitions of this moment. It is a very old image from the 70s, and it has to do with the urban renewal in Rotterdam at that moment. There was a movement originating right here at TU Delft of architecture students saying, we are not going to design and build anymore. We will work with the residents to improve their lives and improve their conditions of living. Instead of designing their houses, we will work with them to improve the conditions of their housing. They became activists and changed their profession to protest with the inhabitants at the city hall. So you could say, what is the role of architects at this moment? There is an analogy maybe with this position 40, 50 years ago. I thought we could talk about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think we will return on this, especially on the conclusions of the renewal too that you mentioned later. But let's move on to, we can come
the
back.
right image is, for me, is for another question for tonight, which deals with climate justice. We all know that in the Netherlands, but also abroad, especially in the developing countries, think of Africa, the people who pollute the least actually suffer the most from climate change and have to pay the most. This is also what we see now with the energy prices soaring. That is people without money who suffer the most. This is an image that is, well, it's a project that is quite well known in architectural circles. It is the International Architecture Biennale, a project you may have heard of in Bospolder Tussendijken. It is a social project as well as an energy transition project, making this neighborhood gas-free, fossil-free. But the question that I would like to ask is it logical that we start with the poorest neighborhoods where people actually have to put in all their time and money to create this energy transition, so they pay the most? But what is fair is the question.
Totally, and reminds me of Varoufakis, and the poor must suffer the most. But we come back to this later. Maurice, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Maurice Specht. I have a background in philosophy and political science. And I'm fascinated about how people create their own environments. I have a difficulty always sitting down, so staying in university wasn't really an option. So I decided to actually set up projects, mostly in Rotterdam. So I've set up a library run by volunteers, which is open 5 days a week to show that actually you can create a public space by yourself if governments decide that they can be closed. And we now created a cultural space on an island in Rotterdam by taking apart a former building and using the former building as the basis for a new building. And we weren't planning to be a building company, but we ended up being a building company for 3 years with 50 people who, for one reason or the other, had a distance to the labor market. So I always tend to create connections between participatory projects, social problems, and physical spaces.
Thank you very much. The whole thing of exclusion, no? Like the whole aspect of who is left out. You sent us this image, which I have in there, is very beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
So this is the building on the island that we created. It was the day before or the day that we opened. And what I like about the image is that you straight away see that, yes, there is a design, but it's also bringing together all kinds of different elements which somehow shouldn't fit together. So that's what I always like to do, to bring and to fit stuff together which logically wise don't fit together, but make it logical that it actually fits together. So I think there also the discussion leads up to that. How do we connect this big question of circularity to academia, to citizens, which isn't a logical connection unless we make it? It's also what I take away from the video, which we started with. No, it's not normal to protest. She wants to change what is normal. She wants to change what is logical. And as long as we don't do that, we just keep on moving on the road that we're on. So there, we need to change the way logic works.
The difference from the protest and this is that you have done a positive protest by building this, but not instead of just blocking the road. But we can come back to this.
Blocking the road isn't negative.
Is not negative.
No.
I love you already. I like that. I have done that as well. Let's now move to Alexander. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Alexander Wandl. I'm an urbanist and landscape ecologist from my background, and I'm an associate professor and head of the section of environmental technology and design here at that faculty in the Department of Urbanism. And I have been working over the last years on what the effects of a shift towards more circularity, independent of what actually are the values that drive these shifts are, so be it geopolitical control over resources, new business cases, a shift towards more sustainable development, what these effects are actually on the physical built environment. Because this discussion is completely lacking in the circular economy discussion. And this is actually what is our daily environment, and there will be changes, and these changes may be more drastic than we expect, and they are lacking in the scientific discussion, in the public discussion, and in the discussion between.
Especially to make an effect, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, and perhaps a last sentence, and also, because I see it's a lot of colleagues are here in the audience from the Circular Built Environment Hub. I'm also a member of the Circular Built Environment Hub, which is the faculty's platform where more than 60 researchers are collaborating from the material to the regional scale.
Thank you, Alexander. What is very nice about this panel is that, first of all, it's good to clarify that not everyone is an architect, so it's the first thing to notice. Second thing is that there are engineers here, there are historians here, there are political science here. So we have to keep an eye that this is not a discussion about architecture. Of course, we are in the Faculty of Architecture, but we want to address this topic from the whole built environment point of view. So for what we will talk today. The image, sorry.
Yeah, it's a bit small, but no worries. I have chosen this image, which is one of many that 360 dialogues drew based on a book that was recently published, The Impossibilities of Circular Economy, Separating Aspirations from Reality. And I chose this of two reasons. The first is it's a very interesting attempt of science communication of scientific results, because we cannot just hammer data and numbers, but we need to communicate on different levels. I think that's important. And the other one is the criticism that circularity, circular economy became kind of a silver bullet to solve every problem, it seems. And, it is not. Let's keep it with that.
The famous panacea, no? That like this will solve everything. But I do find it interesting, and this is to bring back a bit the video that Javier showed in the beginning, what you mentioned about the communication part. What we saw of this environmental protester, mentioning again and again the 1.5, the 3 degrees, etc., and how many people are like, so what, you know? And it remains very abstract, and we have to acknowledge that we have not been very good at communicating the whole thing of climate change yet. Or worse, to put it, to implement policies. Not in Britain, but in France, we all remember the yellow vest protest, the yellow jacket protest, where a decision by Macron and his government to raise the taxes of diesel especially, and to cut carbon emissions, ended up in a massive protest in France that lasted for like 7 weeks, and was according to some polls, supported by up to 75% of the population in France, also talked about this idea that, yes, we want to stop climate change, but it cannot be like that. It cannot be coming from the government and say, we have to stop it, and here's the measure how we're going to stop it. Because as Michelle was mentioning, suddenly the ones who end up paying the big bill are the ones who are in the weakest position. Normally, the people who are in the periphery of the cities who never managed to get a nice, cozy house close to the tram stop. So we need to learn from, I think, that those experiences to see, to start to understand why these people, of course, these TV interviewers are horrible. I hope I never meet such person. But I want to think of the 75% of protesters. Of course, some of them were fascist and anti-Semite and whatever. But many of them, they have a point. You, the experts, the elite, the academy, have designed our cities and have tell us this is all fine, and suddenly you tell us everything we did is wrong, and you're gonna completely pay the bill now, without actually punishing the main guys or the owners of the company. So I think we need to a bit understand, because otherwise we have Giorgia Meloni's and we have almost Bolsonaro. Oh my God, you know. So we have to be really aware of what is logical according to scientists and the academy, and what actually citizens' main concerns are. So let's talk about the first question. So tonight we're gonna deal with only 6 questions, hopefully, and we are gonna end up with a kind of collective conclusion, hopefully, that also allows other voices to be part of. The question is posed, and I will allow anyone who wants to answer first to answer, and 1 or 2 answer, we can move on to the second one, and then we can return. So, is academia obliged to lead the way in finding new material and process alternatives, or should it be a demand from the citizens? Who wants to answer this question?
Well,
Michelle?
I'll just start. I think either academia or citizens is kind of putting it to polarized, because there's, well, in advance we were talking and saying there's actually a lot of parties in between. There's a lot of companies, there's a lot of institutions that also have to deal with finding this new material and process alternatives. But I do think that academia is obliged to lead the way, in a sense that this is sort of the safe haven that you can use to experiment, to find new materials, to to find new solutions. Whereas they can be coupled to companies and to the building industry. To find that this is a demand from citizens, I don't think it is necessary to wait for that. It's a little bit like, if you want the building industry to become circular, do you really want all citizens to understand what circularity really means? Do we all understand what it means? It's kind of complicated. It's like, do you have to...
I don't know, because, for example, and we are not talking now of circularity, but we are talking of animal welfare. In the US, there was a lot of people protesting for the way that animals are being treated in farms, especially pigs, that are not able to even rotate, until they managed to push the government to actually, and the scientists to actually find out solutions that they need to give better welfare to animals. So why not really start to research or maybe influence, if we can, from the academy, what citizens can do in order that it's a demand from them? Because again, what I'm worried is that we end up in a kind of Macron situation in which we read all the facts and then we have to make this drastic measure based on the beautiful designs of TU Delft. Wait a minute. Or the Academy of the City, of course, sorry. Yeah. Please, Alexander.
Well, just a short answer. I think I would be all for it to make a distinction between making the building industry circular and talking about citizen involvement in all these other things that have to do with nature, food, animals, clothing, you name it. There's a lot of citizens' involvement on those other fields already, but I think the building industry is something that, in particular, you as a community are responsible for.
Alexander.
Yeah, just to reflect on the question what you said also beforehand, because I don't think it's either or, because the examples where there was a working together between science and citizen, I'm just the back of my mind, citizen councils that were in France, Sweden, Austria, I don't know other countries, that were, I think 1,000 or 100, depending on the size of the country, randomly selected people that spent months to develop climate policies. The results were much stricter and more demanding than everything that we have on the policy discussion now. And it's actually policymakers or politicians and the economy that are afraid of it. It's not so much about the citizen versus science, I think. Yeah, so I think we have to pay attention.
That's a very political thing, no? Like, is it, you think, because you gave them the power to come up with the solutions, or is it because or is it because they can come up with better solutions themselves? You know, like many times it's just that they are gonna be opposed to this somehow. What this guy says on the TV, like, you guys telling us how to live, right? It's quite annoying, right? Or not?
Of course it's annoying. Nobody wants to be told that. But I think the thing is that it's a co-creation, this process of policies. Yeah, and I'm really curious where the real experts on participation, what your opinion is on this.
Yes, please, Ingrid.
Clearly not either or. And I would say there are kind of two ways of looking at it. So one is from the power and who owns the mic. So with this protest, it's often people that don't feel heard, only see that as the only way to kind of raise their voice. But on the other hand, there are a lot of great co-creation projects that are on a local scale and do these hyper-local transformations. So, and here I see is the missing part for leading authority. So what can we learn from these local, hyper-local transformation pilots or on city scale? How can we transfer them from one side to another? What can we learn? And how can we ensure that other people can participate in that? So not only citizens, also scientists, journalists, politicians, but use these as an example and ensure that the debate remains collective and people should be included.
You want to comment on that, Juliana?
Yeah, I totally agree with that we have to integrate more these bottom-up and top-down processes. But I like to comment on the video first, because I really see myself in that activist as being a woman, relatively young, and sometimes because I'm not European. So I get a lot of looks, and people often dismiss what I'm saying because they say, oh, that's too radical, or I'm much older than you, so I know better than you. So I really feel very personal when I see this video. And I remember that I actually tweeted about it because in addition to this personal thing that I had, I also have concerns about the ordinary citizen. As she said she was an ordinary citizen. And I don't think that's really the case because she's for sure very privileged. Maybe she doesn't see it that way. And the other thing that bothers me about the video is the putting the blame on the individual. So, but for instance, in the video, talking about the way the girl was dressed or whether you have an iPhone or whatever, normally the climate people, they are dismissed with this discourse of you have to change yourself and completely change your lifestyle. And it's true that we have to change it, but some people have to change more than others. And I think this misunderstanding of who is ordinary and who is not ordinary is a problem. And in that case, I think, well, in the yellow vests, I think it was, the problem with the policy there is that it was really distanced from the people. So there was no citizen involvement when they decided to raise the cost of the diesel, while other people would still be allowed to fly, for example. So I think this disconnection between how people really live, like the realities of people, and policy making or architecture or urbanism, city planning, this is the problem. We are so disconnected to the reality, to the material realities of how people live, that we cannot make good decisions. And with integration, listening to people, what they do, how they organize, how can we integrate this top-down as well and leverage actually this power and potential from the bottom?
Thanks, thank you, Lena. Maurice, I want to ask you a bit, because you're also a bit, if I understood you correctly, exploring alternative ways of learning, right? Like there was this Austrian Jewish who ended up in Mexico, don't ask me how, but Ivan Illich, maybe you know him, who made a book called The Schooling Society. And basically he was saying that we should get rid of universities because universities' main agenda mostly has been to promote capitalism. So the idea that the solution against climate change is going to come from the very same persons who make all the innovations of materials and etc. to make modernity happen, it's a bit suspicious. Or what do you think?
It's a difficult question. And now I understand who you're referring to, Ivan Illich with the Schooling Society. He wasn't in Mexico, he was somewhere else.
He was in Cuernavaca.
Well. There's something weird in this question already.
And also in Puerto Rico, but anyway.
No, but there's something weird in this question. There's this word, who's obliged to lead? With this leading, there's almost already this disconnect as if somebody should be in front. So as long as we're in this mode, who's gonna lead? It's always gonna be either or. Somebody has to follow the other. So the big question is, are we going to step away from this model, which we are very used to, that somebody takes the lead? I don't think so. The other thing then becomes the question, well, if nobody leads, will that lead to us doing nothing? That's the fear. That's not the case either. The thing is, and that's what you were also referring to with the citizen assemblies, they are well-organized moments in which people have a real conversation. So the thing is, it's not who's going to lead, who's going to organize these processes in such a way that we enable people to come together. So as long as we don't do that and say, well, there's an expert, you're now going to change the world. There's always somebody going to stand up and say, oh, you're not really the expert. You can't tell me what to do. So it makes it very easy to dismiss you. So it's also what you did, I think you did very well with the WIMBY project. So it was very well thought out. How do we create moments in which people get together? So as long as we don't do that, we'll stick to this lead narrative, which will take us nowhere.
That's a great feedback. let's move on to the next question, and we can always return, I hope, which is kind of connected to the previous one. So does academia or universities have the right or even obligation to educate the population on the consequences of not paying enough attention to the aspects of material consumption and waste? Who wants to answer this one?
I can maybe start. I like in this question what caught my attention was the educate thing. And as a public participation or someone that does research on public participation, this is really at the lower level of the ladder of participation that I mentioned earlier. So in that case, I think we should definitely go up. So if we really want this gap that exists between experts or policymakers or politicians and the citizens and society, if we want to close this gap, we have to go higher in this ladder, and instead of educating, we have to empower citizens and work in partnerships so that they really influence decision-making at any scale. So that's my take on this question.
Anyone else wants to answer on this one?
Well, I can just second that. And I'm kind of a little bit allergic to the word educate because it means like we know how to do it. And I think academia can also learn a lot from, well, real life, from society at large. So it's basically to kind of ensure that every kind of scientific output is contributed to the commons. So it needs to go out, and in order to kind of open it up for people to learn from it, to participate in it, we can just build capacity for change. And I think this is the first step. And yes, academia has the right and the obligation to do that, but also all citizens have the right to participate in these and just should be empowered to be part of it.
Yeah, but isn't it academia and universities structured precisely in a very hierarchical way, from the professors to assistant professor to postdoc to doc to master to blah, 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 all the way to the guys who clean the garbage? Like, and now we are like, no, everybody's the same. We're going to be all together in this problem. Well, we have a huge hierarchy in society. So it's a difficult step, right? To suddenly, with all your credentials, go to the neighborhood and say, we are all equal.
Well, it's not like everybody is the same. But if we want society to change and we talk about transitions, we can only make transitions happen if everybody participates. It's not somebody telling what to do.
But then the democracy is the balance, right? This is when the ballots come and they choose Bolsonaro as opposed to, or they reject the Constitution of Chile, even though it's the most progressive in history.
Exactly, yeah.
We have a problem, I think. Anyone wants to comment?
Well, I think if you feel as academia that you have the moral high ground, and you will tell the rest of the population what will happen if we don't pay enough attention, then you run the risk of being treated like the poor woman in the video. Nobody likes a good person, a moral, high-standing person. Nobody. In Dutch, there's this word ontzorgen, to take worries away. And I think that is probably a very good strategy also for academia or for people working on making the society more sustainable, more circular, is to take worries away and not put all the burdens on people because they cannot take it. You know, they have, what did this woman say? They have children, they need to take the car to bring them to school. I don't know what they all need to do, but a lot. And they cannot take all this burden. So I think you have to be very careful with taking this moral high ground.
But Juliana was saying that she really feels uncomfortable with the fact that suddenly they point out to the hypocrisy of these supposed experts, because all of us carry an iPhone that consumes like hell amount of elements which are mining the whole world. So, but they are maybe just trying to bring you down from the sky, right? So, don't you think?
I think the problem is the burden is in the wrong people in the end. When you put the burden on people that are already struggling, in the case of the yellow vests, then of course you will have a reaction from that. So I think we know that the people who contribute more to climate change are also the ones that are not being affected and probably will not be affected. And I think that's the problem in the end, that the burden is on the ordinary people that are actually ordinary people, not the woman in the video, in my opinion.
Yeah, Alexander.
Yeah. I have a similar problem with the educate the population, but I think that there is something that academia can really do, and what the academia or science has learned over the last decades, and that is dealing with uncertainty. Because for a scientist, nowadays, it's normally to talk about probabilities, scenarios, yeah, and that gives us away from this, again, firing with hard, narrow figures and changes, but it's about showing because there is not one solution to the problems that we are, the multifaceted problems that we are facing as society. But this dealing with and showing and discussing and trying to get a grasp on the uncertainties and the possibilities, I think that is really what academia can contribute and should contribute, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, that's. Yeah, but still, I want to insist a bit on that. Like, do we have a role? Do we really need to communicate better? Like you were saying, we do, no? Like, I don't know if educate is the right word, but I chose it deliberately because it sounds annoying, and but most of us still don't understand all these scenarios which are modeled in a computer, right? So, but they can very well understand, as we were talking with Maurice, when the gas price increases, right? Maybe Maurice, can you tell us if we can get the education through life?
You keep asking me very difficult questions. I find it puzzling that we don't like people to take a moral high ground anymore. Why can't we stand for something? What makes it so difficult to stand for something and be told you were wrong, maybe? But once we say, oh, you can't have a moral high ground anymore, how are we going to change? So there's a difficulty for me there. It's also that you said, can't we educate? We can't use the word educate. We're in an educational situation here now. This is what the university does. So once we give away those words, where does change come from? It might be interesting now that with the rising gas prices, economy might force us to change. So we can try to have a moral high ground. You should change. You should use less gas. No, I'm not going to do it because I have to give up something. Now there's a different incentive for you to give up because you can't pay for it anymore. It's not the pleasant way of making movement. It's probably no politician will ever say, let's raise the prices in such a way that people can't afford it anymore. If that would be the case, there have been policy papers on the EU level to say, let's do that. It's never going to happen.
It has happened many times. Oh, yeah. I can tell you a whole history of Latin America.
Well, on a European level, with the climate, we have not been able to say we're going to raise prices in such a way that you can't fly anymore. There's a talk about flying taxes, which is 10 euros a ticket. It doesn't going to make any difference. So as long as we're not willing to feel the pain, so that's why also when she says, well, I don't want to interrupt your life, we'll fucking have to interrupt our lives. That's the whole thing. We can't move on the same path. It's very simple in a way. We can't move on. So if it doesn't hurt, it's not going to change anything. So the question is, how are we going to organize the hurt in such a way that it is shared out equally or shared out differently? But it's going to hurt anyway.
But you are saying that we need both. We need also the positive examples and the annoying, the protests which disturb. We need both, right? Like.
Yeah, we need the disturbances, because otherwise we'll just move on pleasantly as things are. Because why would you give up the pleasantness? Nobody's willing to give up what's pleasant.
But at the same time, you have to also show examples which actually can make it happen, no? Like the one you did.
No, so you can do stuff now. So you don't have to wait to wake up one moment in a different world. We'll have to work our asses off to get there. And that can be nice. It doesn't have to be all sad and difficult and worrisome. But it's gonna hurt. So with the whole building of the building on the island, at one point we had to pay for, it's called the bouwlezen. I have no clue what it's called in Dutch, or in English. So we had to get a permit for the building. And there's a whole code for that. And it just says, well, if you build a building of this particular size, you have to pay us 35,000 euros. But they don't take into account that we build it with volunteers, that we build it with circular material, because it wasn't in the code. So as long as we don't change all these rules, we have to create beautiful projects where people all come by, oh, it's so nice, it's so beautiful. How did you do it? Yeah, because we worked very hard against the rules. So best thing is, if we change the rules, then way more projects like that can happen.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Just one last question on that, and we go move to the next. Michelle, you are part of the Dream Team or Dean Team of School for a City. What are your takes on the way we learn? Because you know the classical system, you have a PhD and so on. Are you changing something in the way that you are teaching at the academy?
Well, it's a completely different question, but
I know,
a nice
sorry.
one. I think what we are changing is that we don't have a very hierarchical system. So we call our school a learning community. We usually have a crazy amount of staff in any project that we do. So it's sometimes almost the same as the number of students, because I do think that the more senior scholars that we have, well, such as myself, can also learn a lot from the young students that participate. So it's more of a circular thing, I would say.
Exactly. It's a different. It's not a hierarchical. It's more like a network. It's teaching each other. It's Ivan Illich.
But
sorry, you don't. Yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, teaching each other, right?
Yeah, teaching each other. Yeah, and it's not like the. Well, of course, it has to do with our students are mostly graduated already, so you are all professionals, one more experienced than the other. But I do think that is a very valuable.
Can you extrapolate it to the bottom part of society? Can you learn from the guy who works in the port?
I think what we are trying, one of the three themes that we deal with at the school is the Anthropocene. So that has to do with exactly this, material consumption, how do we stop oil, etc. And the way to dive into that is to make it, well, first of all, make it personal, and to realize how the fossil fuels actually involve your own life. But then, because this is not enough to change your personal life, then to extend it up to systemic change. And this is, I think, also what we have to discuss dealing with this. you were already talking about architecture being part of the capitalist system and this being a problem for the last, well, half century probably.
Whole modernity.
Yeah, and this is also a problem, I think, because, and the reason why I said there's no reason for the architecture profession to take the high moral ground, I do think that you as architects need to define your moral position, but it's not like you are able to educate the rest, because in fact, the architecture profession is not leading in this respect. There are other people, projects, groups that are far more advanced in thinking about circularity than the architects. In fact, we were talking about architects jumping on the bandwagon of circularity. That has recently happened. So I do think that architecture and the university are the right places to develop more knowledge and to also spread it, but as to educate the rest of the population, no, maybe it's even the other way around.
I like that. Alexander.
I'm gonna add to this or not contradict, but a counterposition a little bit on that. Because of course, we are teaching very differently in different courses in this faculty. So I'm not sure if the classical hierarchical teaching is the predominant way of teaching. I'm not sure. We are teaching more and more in situated learning environments where we teach and work together in co-creation with stakeholders, with citizens, and so forth. So this is one. And the other one, and there we really are educating and need to educate as a faculty of architecture and the built environment, is to actually make certain building standards, yeah, that are now not in regulations and so on, the basic knowledge for the future architects. And I think that is because all these standards do not change, yeah, if there is not input from academia, practice, industry, and the future architects need to be equipped to deal in a world where circular buildings is the standard. And that's our job. And I think we did quite exceptional steps in the last years to get closer to that.
I agree. So, but that's a different part of educating the citizenship, right?
Now, of course, we are not educating as Michel said. It's not our job.
But still, even regulations need to be communicated, right? Like why we are doing it, right?
Discussed.
So it's so important. Let's a little bit move to the next question. We have 3 more, so let's go to this one. And so do you have hope that the theme of circularity can turn into a bottom-up movement, not necessarily led by, let's say, scientists or academia, but by the citizens themselves? Anyone wants to answer this question? Difficult? Yes, not only for you, huh?
Well, it's sort of it's a rephrasing of the former question in a sense. Who's going to lead? Is it going to be a bottom-up movement, or is it going to be academia which lead the way and educate the others? It depends also on what you want all to be circular. If I think about the building that we make, it's never going to be a citizen-led movement. So building buildings, let's not hope that people are all going to build their own building. That takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of skill. We won't change the world fast enough if we leave it up to people only. So I think the level at which you want the circularity to operate is a different one.
Yeah, but don't you think that we are a little bit blind to the fact that a lot of parts of the world have dealt or deal with circularity as a necessity? I'm thinking of Rio favelas. I'm thinking of, of all methods of agriculture from the Aztecs to Chinese that have dealt with the necessity of circularity, you know, because they didn't just simply have either the fertilizers or the materials to, so couldn't we, is there circularity without academia, actually? Maybe that's the question.
You have a good point there, but I think that the question is to describe circularity as a movement. It's principles of dealing with building, with materials, with regenerating, with producing, yeah, and so forth. So for me the question is if, and of course these principles, these circular principles, have been used since thousands of years.
Well, I don't know if it's a movement, but or a style, favela style, for example.
Could I put in another angle? I think circularity has been a characteristic of any society that has a shortage of means. Whenever there's not a lot of resources, people turn to circularity, like repairing, reusing, re-engineering, re-everything. Of course, the whole narrative worldwide has changed away from circularity since the period of progress, I would say, after the Second World War, when the whole ideal of more, of
of sustainability, basically.
No, of growth. The narrative of growth has been so strong that also the societies that were formerly ruled by a circular mentality have changed. So, and that is what makes it so difficult. So we now have to come up with a new narrative that is not about more and more expensive, but about maybe less or maybe better, but that is very difficult to change. And it is so intertwined with our economic and capitalist system that, well, you know what they say, it is, for people, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. So that is what makes it so hard to imagine like a worldwide mentality switch into the direction of circularity amongst all citizens.
Anyone wants to reflect on this?
Yeah, I totally agree. And here I want to cite a book. Recently I came across this book. It's called Post-Growth Living. And I don't know if you know, but it talks about this idea of avoiding, to say, sacrifice or burdens, because we can indeed imagine different ways of living that are also good. So the end of capitalism does not have to be bad or a sacrifice, you know. And here I think we have a lot to learn from Latin America, for example, and indigenous knowledge, because they have a different way of living, and this is really in conflict with our way of living. And I'm Brazilian, but in Brazil we also have, well, a lot of European and American influence, so the way we live there is also capitalistic, and we kind of want to be Western, or, you know, this growth is also very present there. But we also have these other indigenous people living in a completely different way, and they still are able to meet their needs. So I think we should try to find ways to talk about this, that not growing or degrowing or post-growing, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't have to come with sacrifices and burdens only. But again, I think whatever we do, we have to make sure that the most vulnerable do not become even more vulnerable. So.
Yeah, but I have a problem a lot with this idea that we idealize such places, Africa, Lagos, Remkolhas, and whatever, you know, these. And then, but do we really want to switch places with them? Not really, right?
Yeah, but I'm not saying that we have to leave.
They will say, you want to really live this life? Come here, I'll take your place in Amsterdam Canal.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we have everybody to go back to live in the middle of the forest. What I'm saying is that we have to be able to explore different ways of living. And I know that many people will say you're being naive. I've heard that before. I don't care. I think that's something that we have to do. And if we don't do it here at the university, where are we going to do that?
Yeah, Alexander.
Felix, sorry, may I interrupt on you? Because you did now something that was exactly in the video, right? You broke down the problem to the individual, on the individual. You don't want to change with this person, or do you want to change? I think there is the, that's the
personally, you mean?
You did that just now in these questions. And this comes back that there is this discussion about individual change or systemic change. And when we are talking about systemic change, then indeed we have to talk about our values, of what we want, how we want to live together. That's actually the key question, because we call our society now a consumerist society, right? That's what is our self-definition. And you will have in the circularity field in many people that say, well, we make green growth. Yeah, but we can have a discussion about it, if this is possible or not, or in how far that is possible or not. But there is a discussion on a higher level that needs to take place, I think.
Yes, but Michelle mentioned something that the only way that circularity has appeared is when there's a scarcity of resources, out of necessity. But wasn't it, and this is a kind of very Dutch situation, when there was the oil crisis, suddenly the resurgence of use of bicycles became massive, and then has stayed on, right? Like, some things maybe are not out of necessity anymore, but become cultural. Is there a hope there?
I think the bicycles, they were already there.
But not as many. They were decreasing in number.
The whole primacy of bicycles maybe became a little bit stronger. But actually, if you look at that period, it could be disappointing, because the results of the oil crisis was that there was a huge economic recession, and the emphasis on the environment, on the reduction of pollution, etc., just went out of the window with everybody in surviving mode. So it's not purely, this is the same thing that you see now, you know, like with Corona, we had a chance to really turn the buttons and change things to make systems change. It didn't happen. It was a restoration of the status quo. So it's not, it's not necessarily true that things will happen, that it will be a catalysator.
Pessimistic.
Sorry.
Ingrid, you really are also kind of optimist in the way that information, if it's shared to everybody, could trigger these bottom-up changes, right? Am I right?
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it bottom-up, but I think it's really collective. So in this kind of example, so for example, we have a pandemic, we have the war, and the oil prices go. So more people feel the need in doing things different. So then we need good examples and kind of learn from each other to kind of continue in these new practices. But we also need authority to kind of provide guidance to change policy and ensure that these policies work for everybody, not only those that have the mic and can put the power and ensure the lobby, and to ensure that for everybody there is something to kind of go in the same direction of the change. And what happens with polarization is that we keep the status quo kind of, well, in the same level, right? Because we have two forces that kind of go against each other. So what I'm positive about, if we really can communicate a change, a pattern, and have a lot of because there are also a lot of solutions at hand. So scientists have a lot of solutions. There are a lot of, well, bottom-up movements. There is a lot in place. But what is missing is this connecting infrastructure that helps us in seeing that we are going together in that change. And I think if we just have governance that can
That
support
also goes back
that,
to what you're saying, Alexander, right?
that we have scientists to communicate the good examples. But oftentimes it remains in like there is this solution that is the best.
But we need this common language.
Well, common language for sure, but I think that the last sentence was the most important, because at the moment it seems that we are always finding one solution and then the policies run for it independently of individual cases, of conditions and so forth. And I just want to add something to the pandemic discussion and change and how much this changed. What was for me so shocking to see is that during the pandemic year, when nearly the whole planet was in lockdown, the Earth overshoot day, so the day when we have used our more resources than our planet provides, hardly moved. It was 3 weeks earlier. So just to understand that everything we love stopped, more or less, or a lot of things we love in sense of doing things together stopped, and still we used so much of energy, material, and so on. So that's I think
because the construction sector didn't stop.
What?
The construction sector didn't stop.
Among others, but yeah.
Not the airlines, they also kept flying empty airplanes. That was tragic. Maurice, you want an easy question, right? What did you inspire other entrepreneurs, artists, intellectuals to do something in the same way as what you did in Brynor?
Can you repeat the question?
That was the easy one, huh? How can this Brynor project or the library become viral? Is that a more easy question?
Well, the nice thing about both projects is that you can actually visit them. They're very tangible. So when we set up the library, it was because the city decided to close 18 out of 24 libraries in Rotterdam. They thought it was a good idea. It was such a hideous idea that they actually said, on the south bank of Rotterdam, there will be only one library for the whole city. That's stupid. So what we did is we said, well, we're gonna create this space, but imagine that you tell your friends, your family, your mom and dad, well, we're gonna set up a library, we're gonna be open 5 days a week from 10 in the morning till 8 in the evening, and we're gonna run it totally by volunteers. They'll tell you you're crazy, and rightly so. Until the moment that it's there, and you show them actually it can be done. So what is nice about these example projects is that they show you what is logically improbable, maybe even impossible, can be done. And it led up to all kind of other people setting up library projects like ourselves. So I know of 5, 6 other projects across the Netherlands where people said, I saw what you did, and now I know I can do it myself too. I know in the neighborhood in which we're situated that people say, what you did with the library, if that can be done in this neighborhood, we can change this square into a green square. So the examples help you to show that it can be done differently. What I don't want them to be is examples of, oh, now we can just sit back, relax, and people will do it themselves. So at one point we were called het troetelbeertje van de participatiesamenleving. There's no English translation for that, but we were sort of the token of what the participatory society could look like. And we said, well, that's not us. Because in the end, for us, the Leeszaal is a political protest now going on for 10 years against the closing of the libraries. So it's a very positive thing. Yes, you can do it, but it's also a protest. So it's something we always emphasize. There is this political moment in there.
I was shocked as a Latin American, maybe too much old school, when I heard the news that the libraries of Rotterdam were closing drastically and becoming privatized. The Central Library becomes a private entity. And I was like, and there's nobody in the streets? Like in Mexico, I imagine there will be, violence, huh? Like people will be smashing cars and stuff. But here it was like, well, we will manage.
No, there was protest, so we brought together 1,000 signatures. We went to City Hall. But policy was already decided, so most of the time people only hear about it after the fact. Then trying to change the fact is very hard work, which often doesn't succeed. So that's why we said, well, you know what, the decision has been made, let's try and create a positive, tangible answer. The other thing is, so we got 1,000 signatures of people. Out of those 1,000, probably 950 people weren't a member of the library. So they lost something else. They lost the idea of a library. So maybe there's also a different question. So when we went around in the neighborhood, we didn't ask people, do you want to start a library with us? No, that's something the city should do. Now, what should the reading room look like? Well, what should it have, and what are you willing to offer yourself? So from the start, we said, let's make it a co-owned public place which we form ourselves. So we're not going to play library.
Super interesting. Let's move on to the next question, because I see Javier getting nervous. Achieving circularity properly will take years of coordination. And this is also what Alexander was mentioning. It's making the long-run effort between multiple stakeholders, and not only academia or architects and citizens, but also, as Ingrid reminded us, we have a lot of people, IT guys, entrepreneurs, and so on and so on. This is more important than rushing into making isolated pilot projects, a bit what you're doing. Again, you're going to tell me, yeah, both, we need both. But I want that you reflect a little bit. Can we have circularity quickly? Because certainly it's urgent, but can we really make it happen in 2 years? Because when the elections are coming, right? Yeah?
You're looking at me?
I'm looking at you, Alexander.
Yeah. I'm asking you why that rush in specifically talking about the built environment, because I'm not sure if our biggest problem is to get everything circular, which is by definition impossible, right? Or if we should rather think of how we are actually developing and changing our cities and so forth. And circularity is one tiny part of a future built environment that is more inclusive, has a different spatial quality, and so forth. So I'm a bit. I know we are discussing about circularity today, and that is with what I started today. This silver bullet that circularity has to solve everything. And I think that's
it is just one of the measures that the IPCC reports mention, right?
Yeah.
And is not the highest priority because energy is the top, but it is a big contributor to CO2 emissions, right?
It is absolutely, but I think what you're right, it has to be a process, because the built environment doesn't change from tomorrow. It's changed constantly and permanently, and this is the thing. Is the process we have to change.
But is it innovation or is it patience and organization?
Combination. Sorry for that answer, but that's what it is.
Can I react?
Yes, please, Ingrid.
Yeah. So I think there is a lot of provoking capitalism, business language in these. And we don't need business as usual. this is about mission-driven innovation. We need to behave different than we know. For most people, this is a different way of working. So everybody feels insecure, doesn't really know how to act, and that makes it that people don't act. And some people raise their voices. So looking for these isolated pilots, or how I call them, hyper-local transformations that are great, it's exactly what Maurice was saying. So it's working, but it's like nobody cares. And somehow we lost this community society. So we can just become very circular. But if we lose society, I think that's not really the way to go, right? So we are somehow over the past years, the past eras, we lost a lot of great stuff that was there. So how can we ensure it's not about being the first, but find a way that we can live on the planet together and ensure that we move forwards and not backwards?
But one of the questions that one of the part of the question is that it maybe means that circularity is not that sexy as we want, right? And it might be a boring job, right? I mean, there are some cases like the examples of Maurice, which are exciting, but many of them might be just stupid kind of regulations about dimensions or about establishing certain rules about chemical cycles or something like that. For that to be sexy or to be absorbed by the community, by the citizens, seems like a challenge, right? Or not?
Can I react on that? I think, as we spoke before, the circularity involves a lot of different disciplines. And what is sexy or appealing to me is not the same as to other people, right? So a chemist person or engineer finds it very sexy to develop new materials. I like to work with urban planning, for example, and social justice. It involves everybody, and that's why I was always talking about, okay, what circularity means, because we can make this chair circular. We achieve circularity with the chair. But if we are really talking about something that is global and looking at these global flows of material, energy, water, all these interconnected systems, then of course it will take years and it will take coordination. But what the citizens, they don't need to use the same language that we are using. That's why I was also talking about imagining different ways of living, because the narrative that we use with different audiences has to be different as well.
I agree. And I don't know if we have a very, very big challenge in being seductive. Like, you go to supermarket, and before we were buying bio X or whatever, no? Because we think it's kind of better for the animals. And now there's recycled food, not recycled food, but recycled goods. And we will also go for that, right? Society will not be against that, I think. But, whoops, that's the alarm that we have to speed up. So let me stop myself here, and let's move to the last questions. What can we learn from your experiences involving citizens in circularity projects? If you are hesitating of who wants to start, I can also take my notebook from here, because, let me see. I think, for example, the case of Alexander. You sent me some text, and there's something which I found very interesting from what you sent me. Circularity is a kind of geopolitical. It has a scale that is not just the neighborhood. It is maybe continental, right? And you're saying that Europe's geopolitical dependency on resource-rich companies has become very apparent. Of course, with the war in Russia and Ukraine, it's kind of super obvious. And then you say mining, scrapping, and recycling are outsourced to countries with lower environmental standards and shifting the burden, which is also one of the things that Juliana is against, and which is called kind of injustice, right? We will need to return those processes of basically dumping the world, to return those processes to Europe. So this is a very interesting utopia that you're proposing. Can you comment on that? Bring the garbage back.
Bringing the garbage back, yeah. It's not so much about the garbage back, but it's bringing the control over material back or over resources back. Because if from a geopolitical point of view that is relevant, and we know it's relevant, then actually we need to keep control over certain resources, let's put it this way.
But why? Because of responsibility or because of security?
No, because of security. The value behind this is security. So the ideology is behind that is
I'm surprised.
No, that is not my personal value, but this is why it's happening. To understand that the policies are made in not necessarily or not driven by the need to become more sustainable, but it was driven by the realization of scarcity, of a global scarcity, and a control over materials, over resources, is crucial to keep our way of life. So we are replacing one form of externalization by another form of externalization. That's maybe a bit of a sad truth, but I think that is what is happening.
A painful truth.
A painful truth. Give me a quick chance to answer also to that question.
Yes, please.
Bit more positive. What I've seen from my participatory experiences is that this working together with citizens, in co-creative environments, is actually breaking down silos in science. Because we are scientists, we are experts, we're specialists on things. And having many of these specializations coming together with citizens, actually breaking down silos, and this is super crucial and important.
Who couldn't disagree with that? Who will disagree with that? I think it's pretty straightforward. I'm wondering if Juliana agrees with what you're saying, because to me it sounds very Eurocentric. But maybe Juliana disagrees. Yeah?
Sorry, it is, absolutely. I referred to the policies of the European Union, just to clarify that.
Yeah, please, Juliana.
Yeah,
but also of your projects, of course.
I don't have a lot of experience with circularity projects, but on that note, I think it's important that we recognize what is behind these drivers of these policies, and as academics, researchers, or as students, we have to understand that everything is political. So we cannot be naive to the politics of the world in whatever we do. And that's, I think, also what Alex is doing, as he just said. It's not my personal view, but he's aware why this is happening. And I don't know how to change it. I just think that we all should be aware of this politics behind everything.
But you also sent me an article about the Google project now in Toronto, right? Which is quite worrying in the way that how we're going to involve citizens. Well, let's map them all.
Yeah, this project is very interesting. If you want to have a look, it's Questside in Toronto. It is a project by the Sidewalk Lab, which is a company, sister company of Google, and they want a beach to develop a urban area in Toronto, front of the water, and they set up a very interesting place where citizens could come and give their opinions, and this place was not digital at all. It was very full of sticky notes, and it looked like a workshop place. And what is interesting about this project, and it was cancelled actually, because it raised so much conflicts and people were so much against it that it was cancelled. And in the website of Sidewalks Lab, you will see that it was cancelled because of COVID. But we know that it was because of the resistance from the citizens and other stakeholders in the city, because they were really worried about losing their city to all these Google sister companies. So I think it's a very interesting case to look at both about the public participation, how they tried to do it, but in the end the citizens were able to kind of understand what was happening and they raised against it.
I find it very interesting, the whole idea of data. I want to go to Ingrid, because you have also been working on data projects, but with the idea to not have this ownership of like Google, but to make it more like for everyone. You have done a project called Open for Citizens. Maybe you can reflect a little bit on that. And also I want you to a little bit comment on your optimism on the aspect of science, on the aspect of designing methods, social learning, systemic thinking, organizational, like all sounds to me like social engineering. How is that connected to engagements of citizens? Can you reflect on both things?
Yeah, it's good. It's nice that you bring the Open for Citizens project in, because I would first say like, oh, it's not about circular in the thing, how we talk about material stuff, but it is circular because it's about open data, and open data is like from start, it's public sector information, it's meant to be reused by everybody, but of course it's not inclusive because you need to be a data expert to make any sense of it. So normal people cannot use it. So we took that perspective and sure, like, okay, if we want to have data as a commons to be reused, how can we ensure that normal people, call it activists, can use data in order to kind of come up with their proposals and use it to benefit, and that they are really empowered to be, well, to be equal.
To be hackers. You call it hackathon.
Yeah, well, actually, but then the hackathon is a mechanism. It's not about the hackathon. It's about the process that we kind of did to include them in the participation, that they understand what kind of data they can use to submit a proposal. For example, like similar things that Maurice is doing, that they can really compete with businesses and really have the right data to proceed, to make more impact.
Yeah.
But it's not only citizens, it's really the collaboration between citizens and, call it, activist civil servants that also want to do something for the common good.
Yeah. I want to go to Michelle now regarding social engineering. Like in some of course, we never know which of you of Crimson wrote what text. I like that. But you, in some of the texts, you mentioned that Holland is famous for the urban planning of Berlage, Van Esteren, etc. Like the most top-down projects. Until the 70s that you said that finally there's a kind of renewal, and then the architects went to the neighborhoods and say, we are going to do the neighborhoods. But then in that very same text, you said, or whoever from Crimson, I don't know if it was Wouter or I don't know, say that, well, that's also patronizing because you are telling now what the neighborhood should want according to what you think that the citizens are telling you, and you are also moralizing what the neighborhood should be. So I wonder, in this kind of history of planning of Holland, do you see a hope for bottom-up urbanism, or what is your take on that when the fall of top-down planning goes out?
You've really prepared some tough questions for all of us, huh? I think just like Maurice described his reading room as a political protest of a group of people. It's not a bottom-up project, really. Yeah? So it's a project that was initiated by them, and then a lot of people actually worked on it with you. I do see the role of the architect not as a completely top-down person, but as someone who has the privilege of thinking about his position within this safe haven of university. But I would urge that is also, this safe haven comes with a necessity to step out of the boundaries of this university into the real world and to start projects there with the knowledge gained in this place. So it's not top down, it's a leading expert role with a necessity and a possibility of getting outside of the university and really creating some, yeah, I would say facts on the ground with residents and with participation. I think so it's not like in the 70s where architects claimed, they were also not, claimed to go outside and completely do whatever the people wanted. It's not a populist stance that I would propagate, but I think it's necessary to create your own position and to create projects from there.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we are running out of time now. Maurice, let's close in the last question. But in a way, we talk about your projects, but I just want to know a little bit of what was the challenging part? What was tough from the whole thing?
They're both completely different projects. So with the reading room, what was tough was maintaining it for 10 years. So how do you organize an institution without becoming an institution is the challenging thing there. So how do we enable ourselves to keep the front door open, and if people come through the front door, allow them to do a project within 6 weeks? So the challenging thing is to keep it alive, not so much to bring it alive. With the project on the island, what was most difficult was dealing with bureaucratic institutions. One of the 3 big policy goals for the former college in Rotterdam was youth unemployment. So we thought, oh, we're going to build a building and we're going to reenact history. We're going to build it with youngsters. So here we have a building project which we want to do with youngsters. The building companies are screaming for people who are educated as builders, and the city says we want youth unemployment to get lower. So we thought, there's 3 things, they're aligned perfectly. We should be able to get that done. I talked to 21 different civil servants. They all make policy about youth, but they don't work with youth. So at the 21st meeting, after 5 minutes, I said, it's not about you, but I'm leaving now. Yeah. And we had an hour, but I just left after 5 minutes because it was a waste of our time dealing with institutional bureaucracies. So that was way more difficult there than with the reading room, because there we had the autonomy to say, you know what, we don't want money from the city. We don't want anything to do with bureaucracy. We're just going to do whatever we please.
So that was the biggest challenge. I always thought that also we were struggling by the fact that all the materials that you have to collect, disassemble, dismantle, take out the screws and all of that, you're saying that's not the biggest challenge.
That's just hard work.
Just hard work.
No,
okay,
that's just putting in a lot of hours.
Fair enough.
So that's a different thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is on the systematic level.
Yeah. Javier is looking at me with these very poisonous eyes. So let's move on to the... Yeah, we had a manifesto, but I think we will have to skip it unless there's a bit of time. So questions from the audience. Yeah, they're leaving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Firstly, thank you so much to you guys for organizing such an interesting discussion. Before I pitch my question, I would like to invite members of the audience to put forward their questions. You're very welcome to come down and take the mic. Okay. I'll pitch my first question then. I don't know whether this has been touched upon too much in what you've thought about preceding this discussion, but I want to ask you guys, what do you, as ordinary citizens, rather than as academics or activists, do in your daily life to engage with the concept of circularity?
Got in the boxes from Amazon, which is already bad, by the way. But anyway, yeah. Anybody help? Cut in the cardboard and put it in the recycling container, right?
But do you think that's enough?
Of course not. We do other things, but it was just an example. But obviously, it's not sufficient, right? But this is what the platform of the city provides, right? If you go to Germany, they will put like 10 different containers of different materials. If you go to Rotterdam, basically there's one. And then if you want to have glass or cardboard, you have to walk 3 blocks to put it. So, well, and I don't think there's a lot of ambition in circularity yet, but that will come at some point, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe I can answer because I'm probably the oldest one. So I still remember the first crisis in the 70s. That was a time when all the from the national government, all the advertisements were started like you should close the water when you brush your teeth. You should turn off the switch of the light when you leave the room. You should not have a car. You should not. And I did all those things all my life, and it didn't have any effect at all. So I feel that this personal approach is really, it's not enough, but it's also putting the blame on people, which makes you feel, well... Guilty. And of course, we are guilty by pure existence, but it doesn't change anything. Huh? So, and also now, I feel that for instance, this year, I haven't been flying at all. Which I used to do a lot, but it's like this feeling of guilt is very, very heavy. And still, I know it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't change anything. So that's why I was talking about this systemic change. I feel like we really shouldn't focus too much on our own, what clothes are you wearing? And so we're all trying to do our best, but we should rise above.
I mean, you're touching upon this idea of having a sense of like instantaneous gratification almost once you do this thing that makes the environment better, supposedly. Do you think that that's something that could be improved to get citizens more engaged in this concept?
Well, if I can quote one designer called Tjeerd Veenhoven. He was a speaker at our school last week. He worked with bio-based materials, etc. And we were talking about greenwashing. And of course, this is, in my world, this is one of the most annoying things, greenwashing. But he was surprisingly mild about it because he said, like, for instance, in the supermarket where you can buy all that stuff that says better for the environment, better for the... Yeah, it's not really, it's not good enough, in my opinion. But he was saying, no, this kind of greenwashing is actually good because it involves a large group of people who actually feel better and get the feeling that they are part of this improvement of the environment. I had never thought of it like about that like that.
I agree, I like it. I just bought my recycled fiber to wash the dishes.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, you're very welcome to come down.
Maybe related to the topic that you just discussed of the feeling, maybe the problem of science convincing the citizens or working with the citizens, discussing, maybe its problem is that science or academia is playing too fair, it's playing too clean, too integral game, Because if you look, for example, yeah, it's just trying to be very academical, while it could be more, let's say, compared to Trump, try to sell feelings, trying to be a bit nasty or something in that way, that maybe science should be less science to convince people, because it's hard to convince people by, say, talking in scientific terms. It's very easy to convince people when you're selling feelings. Maybe that's a bit...
So we need a populist university, you say?
Maybe.
Why not? Huh? I'm totally for it.
If I can react on that, I think I understand where you're going, and I think this goes back to how you communicate and to these different audiences. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a kind of workshop about climate communication at large scale. So, for instance, the advice of this person who studies climate communication was for us scientists to go to the media and make the media make the noise so that the policymakers have to react to what people look in the media. So there are some strategies that you have to use, and I think this is something that we are lacking. We don't know how to communicate with these different audiences, and communicating at large scale in the media is different from communicating in the local level with completely, like, very different social groups all there. We have to be able to convey our message. And I know it's hard, but this is something that we have to learn. Otherwise, we will keep losing people to these right-wing movements, as we are seeing.
I understand. No, I like very much that you're bringing up this discussion. But for me, the difficulty with this is that I don't want to add another voice to the noise. So, and I don't have the answer, and I have been, we hear a lot. You need to communicate use different media. But on the one hand, and then it's probably a discussion for another thing, is if we are entering this discussion, and this discussion is specifically transported via social media and so on, we are actually adding knowledge to the commodification process. And I'm not sure if this is a very smart move forward.
But there is one thing that designers can do, right, in communication. Designers have like the monopoly on images. Like, you don't have to use words or go all the Trump way, but design can actually show, instead of tell, what a world would be like, which is circular, what a house would be like, which is circular, etc. So I think you shouldn't underestimate the power of that.
Any more questions? Yes, one more.
There's one there.
So right in the beginning, you talked about, Juliana, a lot about the participation ladder. And my question in this regard is, I also encountered this in some of my projects, and it's always about we have to move up the ladder because there's a lot of only like information or like educating people, but not involving them. But as you're moving up, you have like on the highest point of the ladder, there's like, we have this new project, maybe a solar park, wind power, I don't know. We have to have people having 50% of the shares or something. But it's a lot about power imbalances and who's responsible for making this move up. Like, do we have to, like the government says, we have to have those 50% shares, or is it enough to just inform the people? Because when I encountered this, like in my projects, some people said, we received this letter that there's a new solar park. I don't care, I have a life to live, I have a family and stuff. I don't care about this. Other people said, I would love to participate, but it's not really necessary. Or is it also about like these privileges? Like who has the time and the resources actually to participate at those high levels? And what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, I guess this question was for me. Thanks for the question. I think what we have to understand is that that there is formal power and informal power. And what you're saying of all citizens actually doing, this is about formal power. But what the informal one is when we, as urban planners, we run out a participatory process with the goal to actually use the knowledge that we are getting from the citizens or their decisions. If their decisions are going to matter, this means that they had power, but it was indirect. So when we talk about citizen empowerment, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be involved or everybody has to vote for every little thing. Some people will just not be, but we have to make sure that the decisions that they do influence what's going to happen afterwards, and this is about the informal level of power. I don't know if that was answers your question.
Partially.
Can I add something to that? Because actually the letter and how you kind of communicate about it already gives an expert a lot of power. So because you're the expert, you're already powerful. And if you want to really try to involve citizens at an equal level, you really need to be careful and acknowledge that even that, by coming there as the expert, you have power. So, and by proposing a solution, already kind of make it like a take it or leave it situation. So way earlier in your design process, there are options to kind of involve people. And I would say if you talk about these big changes for society, and it's not just buying a house that has circular components, we really want to have a circular planet, then there are so many options. We should be aware of our power role and ensure others can participate in the actions to prolong the effect of these decisions.
Are you satisfied?
Yeah, thank you.
This is a very nice reflection. I think Javier wants to close now the house. So please, Javier.
If you want to say something before, please go ahead.
No, I'll take 30 seconds. There's something that still bothers me, is that the built environment is made of several components, right? But we still don't know exactly where to put most of the effort for circularity. Is it about recycling the paper? Is it about the glass? Is it about aluminum? Is it about concrete or steel? What the hell? Like, we really need to communicate these priorities to really make sure that circularity can happen in the most effective way. Like, most of the world is built of these three materials, right? Plastics, concrete, and steel. And not all these super complex diagrams. If we focus on these three things in the built environment, it's a huge, massive change that we could create, of course, by involving citizens in a hopeful way. So thank you, Javier. I'll give you the microphone.
Thanks a lot, Felix. Thanks a lot, Felix, Juliana, Alexander, Michelle, Maurice, and Ingrid for the great conversation we had. I hope that everyone here and at home enjoyed it. I did enjoy it very much. I want to thank you for the gaps, for the empowerment, for the partnerships, for the real life, for the commons, for the transitions, for the pain, for the sacrifice, for the new narratives, for the systemic change, for the collective, for the combination, for the geopolitics, for the guilt, for the communication, and for the people. I also would like to thank you for the education and for the information. I think that probably without information and more education, we will be facing what we are facing already, which are the Bolsonaros, the Salvinis, the Melonis, the Orbans, or the Putins. So thank you very much for your participation. I just have one announcement to make. Is the next BK Talks happening on the 3rd of November. It's called Don't Panic, and this is for students. We would like students to have a look and to the array of possibilities that open up once you finish your career. We have felt the concerns amongst our students about what to do. What is it that you can do besides working in an office? So we will try to open up the conversation with a group of panelists. And also next week, this is even earlier, we open the exhibition here, which is called The Sorting Act, and it's sort of a play that we will do about how to organize a collection. This is a way of trying to talk about how to curate exhibitions in a funny way. So please join us next October 13th at 5. There will be some drinks, by the way, to see how we play around with the organization of the architectural collections that are now dormant in the basement. Thanks a lot and good night. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.